The Justice Beat Talk Show. We are season 7, episode 2, and our guest today is Miss Alexandra Bailey from the Sentencing Project. I'm going to hand it over to our illustrious interviewer, Miss Anelli. Take it away.
Hello, everybody. My name is Anelli, and I am a student at Adler here going to interview Alexandra Bailey. She is a senior campaign strategist that supports state and local advocates working to challenge the nation's life sentencing laws through the Sentencing Project. She joined the National Lifers in America and the People's Church of Flint to highlight the impact of extreme sentencing in the state and to emphasize that the need for a second look is a moral issue, not a political one. She's been working with state legislators like State Rep. Amos and State Senator Stephanie Chang, directly impacted advocates and the loved ones of people currently in prison to push for second chances. And then gonna hand it over to you, Alexandra.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me to join you all on the Justice Beat Talk Show. I'm really honored to be here. Some of our mutual colleagues go way back, so kind of a bit of a sentencing project reunion. As you said, my name's Alexandra Bailey. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Senior Campaign Strategist at the Sentencing Project, and I focus on our state-based campaigns. So state by state, working to knock over the laws that have led us to our problem of mass incarceration.
Thank you. So my first question would be, can you tell us about your work with state and local advocates to challenge life sentencing laws, and what drove you to become involved in this issue?
So I literally got off the road. I was in 4 different states this week, so we're pretty prolific at the Sentencing Project at this juncture. We also have the pleasure of convening a monthly all-state meeting. So advocates from all across the country, we get together and we campaign plan, we share resources, and we support each other. Right now, the Sentencing Project has a multitude of what we call Tier 1 campaigns. So we're working in Oklahoma, Louisiana, Michigan, Maryland, New York State, and all but one of the New England states, that being Maine. We're also supporting campaigns in Florida, Nebraska, and a whole host of other states. So we stay pretty busy these days. And the good news is that the movement around second chances, second look, is really taking off across the country, and it's really phenomenal to be able to support that. I come to this work, as most Black people do, coming from a directly impacted family. My family is originally from Louisiana. I have a loved one who is serving a life sentence in Louisiana. And I'm a 2-time survivor of violent crime, and for many, many years have been rather ticked off with the way that this system creates a dichotomy between supposed perpetrators and supposed victims. And that led to sort of a lot of trauma in my personal life. So when I grew up, I was just very interested in seeing how I could get in the way of that problem.
Thank you for sharing. So you've outlined like several priorities in your work, including ending life without parole and promoting second look provisions. Could you explain what these entail and why they're essential?
Absolutely. So I assume everybody who would tune into a show like this knows what the death penalty is, and death penalty abolition has been an incredible movement throughout the United States. But there was a trade-off that was made for many, many years, which was, okay, we won't put people to death, but we'll give them life without the possibility of parole. And I'm sure you've heard politicians say things like life means life. So, and also in states that do not have the death penalty, such as Michigan, that have never had the death penalty, life without the possibility of parole was something that they leaned on for many years. But the interesting thing about life without parole is that for most of its existence, it actually didn't mean life without parole. Most people, let's use Michigan as an example, were actually paroled at around 15 to 17 years, even on life sentences. And then we sort of hit this tough on crime narrative, and we started keeping people in prison for longer and longer. Now, life without the possibility of parole means even if you go in at the age of 18, at whatever point you die, and you die in prison. Now it's referred to as the walking death penalty. So challenging that, because it exists in most states in the United States, with the exception of only a few. And that population has an incredible racial disparity that we are always trying to tackle, which sort of sits at the center of our work. And second look provisions allow for a person after a term of incarceration to go back before a sentencing judge to evaluate whether or not continued punishment is appropriate in their instance. So we would evaluate somebody based on their rehabilitation, not on their initial offense, and whether or not they pose a danger to the community. And in places where this has passed, it has had resounding success. The people who've returned are pillars of our community. They make us safer. And so I'm trying to push legislation of this nature all across the country.
That sounds awesome. How do you think these laws have a significant impact on individuals, families, and communities?
I think the impact on community and families is actually my favorite part and the hardest part of this job. So when I came onto the sentencing project, one of the initiatives that I was really interested in was opening, cataloging, and responding to all of the mail that the sentencing project was receiving from facilities and family members all across the country. It was just story after story after story of families that, despite the law telling them there is no longer any hope for your loved one, just being completely unwilling to concede that and looking for an opportunity to push back. And so the second we launch a bill almost anywhere in the country, along with our partners on the ground, we just see this swell of family members who are directly impacted, children, parents, a lot of times even survivors of violent crime, coming out to say, this is a good idea. I would like to see people not spend their life in prison, but be rehabilitated and readmitted to the community. And so some of my favorite people in the entire world, I met because they are dealing with what my family's dealing with. And the people power behind mass incarceration is really kind of extraordinary. When you're the world's leading incarcerator, as America is, the amount of people who are impacted is extraordinary. And watching them kind of come out of the woodwork when an opportunity exists and then appearing before the state legislature to tell their story is just, like I said, those are my favorite days on the job.
Yeah, so it just makes all the work you're doing worth it to see your community feel hope. So, how does restorative justice affect your approach to incarceration and sentencing? And can you provide examples of restorative approaches that have shown a success?
Absolutely. So I'm going to use New England as an example on this. We currently have a second look bill and a life without the possibility of parole repeal bill in Vermont. Vermont law has one of the first sort of master's degree level programs in restorative justice. And we actually gave a conference, an educational conference on Second Look at the tail end of last year at Vermont Law. And one of the things that we discussed with all of the restorative justice facilitators is, how do we offer second chances and actually enact restorative justice as an option through legislative action? Meaning that we would fund the ability for restorative justice to be part of any second look petition that any survivor or person who has been justice impacted who would like to engage with it. My incredible organizer in New England is named Dr. Brishani Reese. She also is a PsyD, so sort of right in the neighborhood of the people on this show. She is a survivor of violent crime. We sort of connected on that very early, but she's also a restorative justice facilitator. And so what we've sort of seen, and the interesting part is that I talk to the survivors of these crimes often as frequently as I talk to the people who are incarcerated. And there's usually this 20, sometimes 30-year gap between the person that they knew then, with what happened then, and who this person is now. And there are often answers that only that person can give them. And there's a restoration that only really that person can give them, an accountability, a responsibility taking that only that person can provide. And watching that and having it play out in my own life has really been extraordinary and has very much formed my opinion as a survivor of violent crime, that incarceration is not what is going to solve this problem. It's not what's going to make survivors whole. And restorative justice programs like the one being run at the University of Vermont is just a great program that I would love to see replicated throughout the country, allowing for survivors of crime to gain those answers, to gain accountability, and to join in understanding that the person is rehabilitated and can reenter society. I can't recommend it enough. And also, Vermont law has this program available by distance. So if you want to become a restorative justice facilitator, you can take their course.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Could you share some insights from your experiences in winning campaigns, and how can similar strategies be applied to the fight for criminal justice reform?
So this week was a very good work week. I was in Oklahoma, and Oklahoma is not only the subject of a very popular Broadway musical, but it is also one of the nation's largest incarcerators, particularly of women. It also is the highest rate of domestic violence in the country, one of the highest rates of women killed by men. And the system has spent a lot of time locking up survivors of violent crime for saving their life or their children's lives, or for existing in an offense under coercive control. So this past Tuesday, our Domestic Violence Survivor Justice Act in Oklahoma, which would allow for resentencing of people who can show that psychological, financial, physical abuse was part of the perpetration of their offense, to be resentenced by a sentencing judge. And if at the initial point, so when people get charged now, they can prove this, they actually move to an entire new sentencing range, which takes life sentences off the table, which is huge for a state like Oklahoma. As I'm sure many people listening would know, it's a Republican-dominated state. And I've been unbelievably thankful and impressed in how their legislature has approached this issue. But getting this issue to the top of everyone's mind is not easy. What you'll often find in these campaigns as you start to form them is that there's really sort of a sense of inertia around issues that have been going on for a very long time. So how do we take people from complacency to agitation on an issue? And for the sentencing project, we did a multitude of things that was sort of a combination of top roots and grassroots strategy. So we obviously created a very strong lobbying team that lobbied the state legislature on a regular basis, and sort of filled them in on how much of their state is impacted by this, and more than that, how many of their citizens had gone to prison under these types of circumstances. We also ran a statewide digital campaign that is running to this day, educating the public on what it is that's actually going on in Oklahoma. And like I said before, the second you say it out loud, you just watch the comment section just light up with people going, I'm a survivor, my loved one went to prison, how do I help? And that groundswell with the millions of ads that we've served all over Oklahoma, plus the incredible support that we've received from the press on the ground through the Sentencing Project's push with our communications team, has really sort of created the multi-pronged strategy that's needed to move a population from inertia to action, and then compelling their state legislature to move forward on this. So we had a unanimous vote in the Senate Judiciary Committee this week, and I'm looking forward to hopefully bringing this bill over the line this year.
That sounds really awesome. The fact that they're just considering mental health into the picture, and then for people to see that, not
When the
knowing
word
that it will ever
trauma
happen.
appears in a bill, it's just a chef's kiss kind of day at work, right?
Definitely. So how do my next question is like, how do policies shape our criminal justice system, particularly about sentencing, and how can policy changes lead to more equitable outcomes for those impacted by incarceration?
Um, States have incredible power to make an incredible difference in criminal justice reform. And while every state is unique regarding their sentencing laws, what they've chosen to criminalize, what sentence they've attached to it, what we see fairly universally is that things like the war on drugs and tough on crime, which has produced issues like mandatory minimums, which the Sentencing Project actually put out a fact sheet and a brief on yesterday. So if you haven't seen that, go to the sentencingproject.org. But when we sort of hit this tough on crime narrative, we decided we were going to do things like extend sentences. We created the super predator narrative. We created the drug classification system, which created the crack cocaine disparity that we're still fighting at the federal level and at the state level to this day. And so we have to roll back these policies. We have to accept that 50 years into mass incarceration, 50 years into trying these policies, it has not made us safer. What it has done is locked up generations of Black and Brown people, had an extraordinary impact on women, had a negative impact on families, communities, and children. Our incarceration of children has taken lives away as young as 14, and in some cases, probably even younger, and I'm just not aware of it. This is all the type of damage that has to be walked back in order for us to undo mass incarceration. And so I go into state legislatures and remind them that this is what the people want. They work for the people. And I remind the people that they have the power to choose who their leaders are. And if they are not willing to fall in line on these types of issues, perhaps it's time for a little people power movement to either shift their opinions or shift who is in charge. Because this simply can't continue, particularly for Black and Brown communities that continue to be disproportionately impacted, but also the rate of incarcerated women has jumped to an extent that is so incredibly disturbing to me. The fact that our system, while it recognizes domestic violence in most places, still puts survivors in prison, shows you how behind the legal system is to what our sort of cultural zeitgeist is around a lot of issues. And so I try to bridge that gap and help legislators bridge that gap. But it's a tough fight because a lot of people have made their careers, their political careers, on maintaining a tough on crime narrative based on people's knee-jerk reaction to various types of offenses, even though we know that it doesn't make us safer to have extreme sentences. Guarantee of punishment actually is far more effective than length of punishment. But we actually see very low conviction rates for a lot of police departments across the country. So the system that we're running and have poured billions into, trillions into, is just, it's gotta change because quite frankly, it's just a failed policy. There's no way around it.
And a waste of money too.
And a waste of money too, in a time where most states are watching their bottom line, particularly post-COVID.
Definitely. So how can family members and friends get involved and push Second Look bill forward?
Well, reach out to us at the sentencingproject.org. I can be reached at abailey@sentencingproject.org. If we are not currently present in the state, we will do our best to connect you with advocates on the ground that are pushing for this. That's the great thing about being a national organization and sort of having that bird's eye view. In states where we are actively running legislation, we are regularly hosting lobbying days, call-ins, emails, getting into meetings and town halls with your representatives, activating your church and community to push for this legislation. And if you yourself would like to start an effort in your state, the Sentencing Project has drafted a lot of legislation for a lot of partners across the country. But I think the primary thing that I want anyone listening to this show who's interested in these efforts to know is that you are not alone. I know the system is designed to make you feel that way, but there is a large community out here pushing for these types of laws. So reach out and we will plug you in.
Thank you. And what states are they active in?
Oh, okay. Well, Families Against Mandatory Minimums, has a phenomenal list on their website of all of the states that have resentencing bills of all various types, compassionate release, in addition to second look laws. I sort of focus on the big ones, if you will, the big second look mass impact laws. Our tier 1 campaigns, we have second look bills being considered in Connecticut, Vermont, Massachusetts, New York State, Michigan, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Florida, and more will come to me, and now just Maryland. And the list just keeps growing. So head to our website, track me down, tell me where you're from. And then there are a lot of amazing activists across the country that are running these campaigns in states like Virginia and others. So it really kind of doesn't matter if you're sort of like the reddest of the red or the bluest of the blue states. These movements are there and they are productive and they are moving right along. So it's really good news.
Awesome. And how can we host coverage and or in your interviews of those doing the work on the ground?
I'm sorry, say that again?
How can we host coverage and or in your interviews of those doing the work on the ground?
Oh, I am happy to introduce you to the superheroes that don't wear capes all across the country. But if you look up our state-based partners on our website, you will just see the multitude of superheroes that I have the privilege of working with every single day, who've dedicated their lives to bringing light to an incredibly dark part of American history and politics.
Thank you. I think that's going to be really exciting and sharing so many resources and information.
Absolutely.
So, how has your background in organizing and political change influenced your approach to advocating for criminal justice reform? And could you share any moments or experiences that have shaped your views on this issue?
So I guess I'll get into like an embarrassing memory about myself. So my father kept badgering me to apply to Harvard. Now I come from a poor Black family. I was like the first, I was like, I'm not getting it. I'm like, Dad, I'm not even like, no. So I get into this course in Harvard Kennedy, and it's taught by a man who I admire greatly. His name is Marshall Gans, and he was very active in the civil rights movement and the workers' rights movement in California. And we were supposed to do this exercise, which is called the story of self. And the story of self basically is, why are you here? Like, why are you actually here? And so I wrote this like very, the world is bad kind of thing. And, we all need to do our part. It was very Miss America. And so he wrote this comment on my paper. He said, "This is very well written and it's bullshit. Do it again. Tell me why you're actually here." And that was sort of the first time that I ever talked about my experience as a survivor starting in childhood and my family and my experience. And then he was kind of like, "That's why you're here." And so I think that was just like this huge formative moment for me, because I think the world kind of creates a lot of shame for people about being impacted, about not having. And so, imposter syndrome, which people talk about all the time, I don't think we often talk about like why it is that we feel it and where sort of the prejudices that live in the world that sort of perpetuate that, we don't talk about that necessarily as much as we should. And so after he said that to me, I was just sort of like, okay, I can talk about this. I can talk about this openly, about what it is to forgive somebody who perpetrated an underage sex crime against you. you know, the type of offense that, you know, if you listen to most politicians, they say you should be put under the jail. And from there, I basically was just, I started out in electoral politics, right? I was very interested in the actors who could shape our policy. And I focused a lot on prosecutors and sheriffs. That was my career for a really long time. Prosecutors have a lot of unilateral power, as do sheriffs. And so putting the right people into those seats was a primary focus for me. But after taking that course at Harvard Kennedy, what I realized is how you can power map, how you can really start to look at individuals and systems and find out where its holes are. There are vulnerabilities in these systems, and we can use even the tactics that the system uses against us to sort of further our message. You know, you can sort of reverse engineer things. And so actually starting to think about this in a much more organized and scientific way, and not just sort of shouting at the wind for people who aren't interested. Because really, at the end of the day, these campaigns are about power. Who has it, who doesn't, and how it gets exercised, and how we as people can take what we have and turn it into the movement that we need, you know. And one of the first examples that Gans threw out there was the Montgomery bus boycott. Now, everything's covered in the news like this just came about. It didn't just come about. This was organizers getting together and being like, what resources do we have? Okay, we have a few cars and we have our feet. So that's what we have, and that's how we're going to do our movement. And that's how I learned to think. And once I was able to sort of think that way, I was really starting to be able to take what I knew from electoral politics and what I knew from organizing and sort of combine those things to fight back against a lot of the false narrative that is out there about crime and how we resolve it. We live in the safest time ever. But if you turned on the news on any given day, you would never think that.
Can you elaborate, why is it the safest time ever now?
For the very simple reason that violent crime is down all across the country. There are a lot of instances in some places like Washington, D.C., where property crime is up. But if you look at the trajectory of the United States, for as long as we've been tracking this is like, we're headed in the right direction in terms of what policies that have rolled back mass incarceration have done in terms of promoting public safety, which is what I think everybody wants, right? We all want to feel safe and well in our communities. But this fear-mongering has been the basis of so many political careers that people really haven't figured out how to talk about public safety in a way that is actually data-based, that is actually based on the facts. But that would mean you have to start to combat things like poverty, housing, education, restorative justice, mental health, policing, so on and so forth. And we sort of see this wave of this new generation, particularly post George Floyd, being less and less willing to vote for people that do not align with their values. And while the system is always a little bit slow to catch up, I think it would be very wise for leaders to listen to that generation, because they're coming up and they are going to make decisions based on their values. And that's what it's going to be. So I'm hoping folks drop this narrative sooner rather than later.
Definitely. So is the second chance look only applicable to adults, or do you guys work on behalf of the youth?
Yeah, well, I do not run our youth justice team. That is run by Josh Rovner, and seconded by my good friend Jordan. They're the ones that do the juvenile work, and the juvenile space has really been incredible in terms of working against children being pushed into the adult system, raising the age, working on the conditions under which children are held and for what offense types. An incredible amount of work has been done there, but we're still battling things like juvenile life without parole, where we send children to prison for life as adults. And once the Supreme Court ruled on this, a lot of states started releasing folks, but there's still a massive movement to get rid of people continuing to go into the system via this sentencing structure. And that's a huge push in the juvenile space that obviously sort of plays into what I do, because one of the massive arguments for Second Look, as it began, was brain development and this concept of diminished culpability, that young people do not have the same risk aversion. They do not have the same understanding of consequences. They do not have the same impulse control. They're far more influenced by peers. And this continues up until somebody's 25 to 27, depending on the research that you read. And so this bright line that we have drawn of that if you're 17 or 18, you should be treated like this or that, really kind of, we've all sort of started to accept that this really is not based in any scientific fact. And it's certainly not what brain development research shows us. So the juvenile movement and the Second Look movement, we kind of all get nice and enmeshed now, because we're fighting this really kind of silly bright line that our society has chosen that is not reflective of what is scientifically true.
I agree. So how has media contributed to fear-mongering in the context of justice reform efforts on the ground?
Oh my God. I was giving a talk at the Canadian Embassy the week before last, and I was doing research for this talk, and I was reminded of this story that came out in the 1980s called Jimmy's World. So when sort of the crack epidemic hit, the media really used, I mean, they just, it was just horrendous, the amount of untruth that came out through these reliable sources. And this piece was published in the Washington Post front page called Jimmy's World, which was about a supposed young man, very, very young, I believe he was 11, who, according to this article, was living in a crack house with a drug dealer and a mother who was a sex worker, and was being shot up with drugs every single day of his life. There was this national outrage. Where's Jimmy? We have to find him. We have to stop this. We have to push back against this. This was re-syndicated in Los Angeles and all across the country. This piece was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize in Journalism, only to turn out that Jimmy didn't exist. And this life that was created didn't, that outraged the entire nation didn't exist. But the damage is done. And we continue to see narratives like this that are not actually completely accurate when it comes to what it is that we are looking at. So when I was giving this talk and I remembered that piece, I was just sort of like, whew. The fact that we just buy what is put out about crime and how to solve it is something that the Sentencing Project and organizations like ours are pushing back against fiercely. And we actually have a really great media guide on that you can share with your local news station if you would like. It's available on our website on how the press should talk about crime. But what we often see is one offense, and then we have a slew of laws that impact a ton of people based on one offense. But we don't undo laws based on the incredible number of people who have been rehabilitated. And that is something in terms of messaging in the press that we really need to switch. Sensationalism really needs to be handled.
Yeah, for sure. So I know we've talked about like individuals could being more aware and what's the information going on in the media and also reaching out to the sentencing project. But what else can they do to advocate in reforming life sentencing laws and promoting restorative justice? And what steps can people make to make a difference in their communities?
Well, I think the primary thing that I would recommend is remember that the legislature works for you. They are placed there by you. Those are not closed doors. Go to your state house and say what you need to say, and then call them and say it again and say it again, and then get your friends to call them and say it again and say it again and say it again, and email them. And every time you see something that's not true in the press, call them. These people are not untouchable. They're very touchable, but the system makes you think that they're not. The legislature, the governor, the attorney general, all of these people, they work for you. And you can call them to account at any point. So get your community together, get your church, synagogue, mosque together, educate your community about what's actually true, and then collectively get together to push back against the false dichotomies, because what we know is, and the false narratives, because what we know is that based on whatever political moment we're in, they will pick any community to make them the scapegoat. And if we are not informed, coordinated, and ready to push back, we can be on the table for dinner at any time. And so if you want your community to no longer suffer from this, you really have to get involved with the political process, with the organizing process. And you are not subject to their charity. We're not talking about charity. We're talking about collective people power. This isn't about begging for scraps. This is about creating a power structure that can challenge the existing one. And regular people have that power. And it's really the only thing that has ever changed the system. You just see regular communities that have decided that enough is enough. And they get together, they use what they have to get what they want. And they are the true heroes that move this nation forward.
Yeah, I don't think people realize the power that we have. And I feel
Organized
like
people can beat organized systems. It's the only thing that ever has.
I think like raising awareness and this power dynamic, I think will very much impact in what's going on.
It's
And
David versus Goliath, but occasionally David wins.
yeah, do you think with the presidential campaign coming close, do you think that's going to change anything?
I think all of our political bodies, obviously, it changes everything. But again, the thing that I always remind myself is that these people work for us. And I've just been so heartened to watch various movements stand up against things that they wish to challenge. It's one of the great pleasures of being an American. For Black and brown people, it's been a hard-won right. A lot of people have died and put themselves and their bodies on the line in order to give us that right to push back and to say no. And so whatever stripe of sort of political background you have, I mean, the Sentencing Project, we're nonpartisan. I work with people of all political backgrounds, but what is universally true amongst all of those people is that they believe in justice. And those are the type of people that I hope to continue to build bipartisan support across the country from the top to the bottom, to continue our movement. But, you know, ask the people who are asking for your vote questions. You are entitled to do so.
Definitely. And do you think there's any racial disparities that are present?
Oh, I think there's nothing but racial disparities present, to be clear. I mean, the United States locks up more people than any other nation in the world. In terms of life sentences, they are at the state and federal level disproportionately people of color, disproportionately Black people. And when we look at when that really started in these sort of last 50 years, we've seen the sort of attack on impoverished communities and communities of colors with laws that draw disparities. So for example, let's go back to crack and cocaine, right? You know, we're still fighting that disparity to this day. When we know what we know about drugs and their substances and their impact, but it's based on who uses what. And we targeted entire communities for it. We really need to roll all of that back. But in answer to your question, the simple answer is there's nothing but racial disparities when it comes to sentencing and who is incarcerated. And then we'll often see people of color receiving far longer sentences for the exact same offense type. The one area where there's a little bit of sort of nuance in this is around women, where white women are one of the largest growing parts of the carceral population at this time. And women are one of the fastest growing sections of our carceral population right now. But yeah, when it comes to gender and race, there's nothing good going on. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah, we would think that years later that there should be equality, but it's not.
The arc of justice is long.
Definitely.
But if we wanted, all I can say is that, there's this quote that one of my best friends who's Jewish, always says is that, it's not your job to finish the work, but that does not permit you to abandon it. So we all have to put our weight on the arc for as long as we can to do as much good as we can while we can.
Yeah. And looking ahead, what are your hopes for the future of criminal justice reform in the United States?
I would like to see policies enacted that actually keep us safe. And what we currently have as a system of both accountability and punishment and restoration is nothing even remotely close to that. In, I guess, my little lifetime, I would like to see some of these massive second look laws passed, watch people come home and be the extraordinary people that they are and get in this fight and put their weight on the arc of justice. And if I can do that in my lifetime, then I would consider it a life well lived.
Yeah, something is better than nothing. And what progress do you see on the horizon, and what challenges still need to be addressed?
Oh, we are returning to a tough on crime narrative. And that is something that we need to fight back against with every ounce of our strength, because it simply is not true. This is a failed policy that we need to put all of our weight against. We are trying to use fentanyl and the terrible amounts of overdoses that we've been seeing as an opportunity to strengthen drug offense sentences. It's just crazy. We already know that doesn't work. Then we spend all this time releasing people marijuana and all of these things. What we're going to do is find that 20, 30, 40 years later, we're going to be doing the same thing with fentanyl. We need to stop that. We need to start looking at traumatic situations with domestic violence through the lens that they should be looked at and not sending people to prison for it. We need to look at the mental health crises that people go through and not send them to jail, and having these terrible interactions with police. There's so much that needs to be done. And whatever your passion is, whatever group of people you are passionate about, from religious groups to LGBTQ persons, all of those communities, all of our communities are impacted by mass incarceration. So please join this movement because we certainly need it.
Yes. And from the audience, the question is, for those individuals who are pushing the tough on crime narrative, whether it be politicians or members of the moral community, what would you want to say to them to change their mind and foster more compassion?
People are hard to hate up close. Who people think others are is often just so misguided. I think one of the great things that organizers do and can do is get people who don't talk to each other in the same space. So that the kids that they think are just terrible criminals that should have these extreme sentences at these incredibly young ages because of car theft, if they were to see why that child feels the need to steal change out of vehicles, I think they would start to understand that there is an entire system of injustice that undergirds the thing that they are supposedly afraid of, and that they could use their wealth, power, and influence to start hacking at the roots rather than being concerned about the leaves. But watching people get into spaces together, some of the most conservative people meeting domestic violence survivors and others who've been incarcerated for decades, and then going, how the hell did this happen? Changes things. And that's one of the areas that community members and organizers can do. Invite your elected official to your church, your mosque, your community center, whatever it is, talk to them. Get them in the building with the community that they think they know so well.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people have privileges and have a lot of blind spots that does not enable their compassion for others.
I mean, if I can learn that the person who perpetrated a terrible sex offense against me when I was young was also a victim themselves, that changed my entire perception of why what happened to me. And those are the type of instances that very rarely do those people ever speak to each other again. But I can tell you from my own personal experience and from the many survivors that I've talked to, it makes a difference when you get up close to the thing that you are so afraid of. And it turns out it's not what you thought it was, more often than not.
Thank you for sharing your experience, and I'm sure that others could feel touched by it. And my last question is
Nelly,
there...
let me interject just for 1 second, please. We have reached our 10:45 mark. This is officially our Q&A segment.
Okay.
And so I want to make sure that we check in with our moderators to see if there are any questions coming in. And Daria, who is also developing the review from questions as well from social media platforms. So this is our opportunity to take questions from our viewers and listeners. Let me check in with everyone. Kavan? Okay, I can't hear you, Kavan. That's okay. I see that Daria has posted a question that has come in. And the question is, another major strategic priority for the Sentencing Project is expanding voting rights for citizens with felony convictions and citizens detained in jails and youth justice facilities. Can you tell us more about that and the current projects that are going on?
Yes. So the Sentencing Project has an entire arm dedicated to voting rights, run by the incredible Nicole Porter. And what we know in terms of recidivism is that people being invited back into community as active citizens helps people not commit offenses again, which is something that we all want.
Right.
Right. And one of the things that I always say is that even if you commit an offense, you do not stop being a citizen. And if you are in a jail and you are not convicted of an offense, you should not be kept from your right as a United States citizen. This is something that the Sentencing Project and many of our partners believe deeply, and we're involved both at the federal level and at the state level trying to alter these laws to set up voting facilities within jails to ensure that people can continue to participate in the democratic process. In Michigan, we are, in addition to like people getting IDs, et cetera, when they exit prison, for them to register to vote right then and there. Re-enter society, re-enter as a citizen who has served their debt to society. And like I said, our youth justice group, they are working very hard on making sure that children stay out of the adult system and juvenile life without parole, where we send children away with no hope for the rest of their lives. I've met so many people who've returned who are sentenced to LWOP, and they are the coolest, dopest people that you have ever met, and they are literally the reason that you are safer in your neighborhoods.
You know, when you talked about trying to set up voting, I guess pop-up voting kind of setups inside of jails and prisons, that's what we're talking about, being unique and creative. You know, my day job is with the ACLU of Missouri.
I know.
So right now I'm over our expungement project, in which we're collaborating with WashU and their student interns, so that we can begin to make sure that people who are eligible to vote know that. Because one
Exactly.
of the biggest hurdles is they don't even know.
Oh, and then in
Most of them
places
think
where
that they
they
can't
think they're
vote.
eligible to vote, they're afraid because then they see somebody make a mistake, be on the news, and then go back to prison for attempting to vote. Now, what era does that sound like? You know, like the talk about moving backwards, but when I actually used to work for ACLU National, this was one of my interests in sheriffs. Sheriffs control the jails, and sheriffs can set up voting centers if they so choose.
Okay.
They have the power to do that, which was really sort of my interest at that time in sheriff's races. I mean, many reasons, but that was certainly one of them.
And see, how many people, even grassroots organizations, know that? Because see, that needs to be a part of their strategy around making sure they get these folks their ability to get registered to vote. And that's a strategy that can be used in terms of education and awareness.
There is a reason that they count people who are incarcerated who cannot vote as part of the census in terms of the power within the legislature, and yet that person is not actively allowed to vote. So there are a lot of things that we need to do, but most certainly, I think one of the most fundamental constitutional things that we need to do is ensure that American citizens are given their most fundamental right, which is to be involved in the process.
We could talk all day about this piece, this voting piece. We really could. And we need to connect, Alexandra, because, you know, we got stuff here in St. Louis that we're doing. And the people who are listening and watching, and we even view this on replay, you all listen. There's a lot you can do. We need help. We can't do this all by ourselves. We need the people on the ground, most impacted, the stakeholders like family members and friends, to stand up and recognize you can get involved. There's things that you can help us do. Okay. All right. Let me check for some more questions. Any other questions coming in? Just want to double check before we give the floor back to Alexandra to be able to make any announcements about efforts that they have coming up, workshops, books, resources, etc. Okay. Let's see. Let me make sure I'm not overlooking anyone. All right. Looks like we're good. All right, Alexandra, we're going to turn it back over to you to have the final remarks on any books you might be writing, or workshops or trainings, anything online that's coming up that the people can participate in. We want to know.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. I've had just such a great time with your team, and it's always just so heartening to be around people who are in the fight and on the ground. Please visit us at thesentencingproject.org. The first thing that I always recommend for folks is don't believe the hype, believe the research. And we have a ton of research available on our website with everything from how mass incarceration impacts children to how it impacts women and girls to our national trends, both federally and statewide. We have a state map that can tell you about the carceral population within your state. I would also highly recommend that you take a look at Michigan's map of exonerees. It's something that I track on the regular just to remind myself of which areas of our laws we are seeing sort of the most wrongful convictions, because there are many people who are in prison who should not be. If you don't believe in this movement anywhere beyond innocence, then you should also be part of this movement. If you want to get involved in activism, we have a state-by-state based campaign. You can sign up for our notifications. You can also join our all-state meetings, which happen once a week, where you can get involved with all of the states that we're working with. We can help you start your own effort if there is not an effort in your state or area yet. I've just seen unbelievable things happen from one person who just decides that they've got they're done with that splinter and they're going to dig it out. And, we help write their legislation.
Mhm.
We also have a racial justice fund, which are long-term state partners, to seed money and the power that the Sentencing Project is blessed with back to the ground.
Mhm.
We create state-based fact sheets for our partners. And we have a network of just awesome people all across the country. So please reach out to us.
Okay.
I'm also, if you want to read more about the war on drugs, which is always a devastating read, but we're currently in our Sentencing Project book club,
Mhm.
reading When Crack Was King.
Okay.
I highly recommend it. It actually covers the story about Jimmy's World that I mentioned earlier in this interview. And if you're an attorney or somebody who works very much as sort of the top roots of our system, we have a Second Look network that you can join, which is a community of practice of attorneys who get together and share resources on how they can best fight back from their vantage point. So you can also find that on our website. But most importantly, question what you see,
Mhm.
get involved with your community, get involved with people who are incarcerated and returning citizens, and do not accept that this is our reality.
Mhm. Final question, right quick. This just occurred to me when you talked about a community of practice.
Yes.
There are mitigating circumstances that are often not taken into account when you talk about
Tell me about it.
second looks and social histories and backgrounds. Have you all considered putting together a community of practice around mitigating circumstances for those reasons? Because a lot of family members don't know that these social histories are so key to second looks because there are things that people have not considered as impact.
So I actually should say that community of practice does not just include lawyers, but it also includes mitigation specialists.
Oh, good. Okay, good. Okay, excellent. That's good to know. All right, excellent.
But yes, mitigating
sorry.
factors, they need to be encoded into law every single place.
Exactly, exactly. Okay, Anelli, take it away. You can close us out.
Okay. Thank you, Alexandra Bailey, for all the information that you have shared with us. And it was a pleasure to have you. And is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience about the importance of this work and how they can support efforts for change?
I think I just always just want to remind people that the power lives with you. If you don't like it, you can do something about it. And me and my team, if we can help, we most certainly will.
Thank you. This will conclude our